first off, thanks very much for having me. And thanks everyone for coming tonight. I know it's a weekday night at 6 o'clock, so hopefully y'all have a little bit of dinner and you're kind of sitting down, relaxing at the end of the night. So we're just gonna today talk about what we got here on the screen, which is just getting to know your local neighborhood trees. And I'm gonna kind of talk a little bit about what I'm getting up to in terms of this tree identification guide, and a little bit about my kind of theory and where I kind of come from when I talk about trees and how to identify them, and why I think it's important. And then at the end, we're going to go over a couple little kind of, let's say, tips and tricks, or just kind of give you an example of what the book's going to be doing, because it's going to essentially be filled with lots of tips and tricks on how to identify trees. So first off, although I got a great introduction just now, I just wanted to give another kind of plug to anyone who doesn't know who I am, and kind of say, hey, here's why this random guy is up here. My name is Casey Clapp, and I have been an arborist for about 15 years now. And I do everything in my power to get in and around trees as much as possible. So right now I am a consulting arborist. I started out as a consulting arborist after getting degrees in forestry in Oregon State, and then went up to Massachusetts to work on my environmental conservation degree, which is essentially it's the coverall, but I was focused on urban forestry and arboriculture. That was where I really got that's where my passion really lies, which is working with trees in and around where people are. That's my main focus. And I ended up starting this podcast with my friend Alex Croson, called Completely Arbortrary. We did this in the middle of the pandemic, and it was kind of our way to do a little bit of an artistic kind of outlet, have a way to talk about trees and do something when the whole world had essentially shut down. And he was stuck in his apartment, I was stuck in my house that I was renting with a bunch of friends, and we just kind of put our heads together and said, hey, let's just go throw something out there. And it's a podcast where we just talk about trees. We do a little identification at the beginning and talk about a tree and some related topic to it. That way we can get everyone to understand and relate to the tree, but then we talk about something that's completely unrelated or very closely related, and kind of show how trees are interweaved into our entire existence. So it's anywhere you want to get your podcast, feel free to go listen to it. If you're interested in some really fun tree stuff, it's very varied, to say the least. So you can find just about any tree you could ever be interested in, and I guarantee any topic that you find curious. So that is what I have always said that I do. First arborist, and then over the last couple of years, I've moved that to podcaster and educator, and now I get to add author onto it, which is really exciting because that's kind of something I've always wanted to be able to do, but it's something that is really hard to get into. No one, it just goes out and says, I'm going to become an author, and then immediately succeeds at doing it. Mostly, I wanted to figure out how I could take my passion of trees and teaching people about trees and spread it and get it to as many people as possible. So I started doing courses and classes teaching people tree identification, going on tree walks, and working with Hoyt Arboretum here in Portland, as well as other different groups and organizations around the country, and ended up finding that there was this niche that was really needed, that I was perfectly kind of positioned to fill, certainly here in Oregon, in Portland, but then anything that's growing and happening in the Portland metro area in terms of trees is generally applicable everywhere else in the greater Pacific Northwest. So ended up adding that to my name, and that book is going to come out later this year. Actually, I'm sorry, earlier next year. It's going to be August of 2024, and essentially it's a tree identification guide. And I curated the trees that I chose particularly for the Pacific Northwest. I wanted to cover trees and a niche that is not really exploited right now, if we can use these kind of ecological terms, where I wanted to cover all the common trees where people live. So not necessarily the trees that are out in the forest that are growing natively, not necessarily any possible tree that could be planted here, but I wanted to cover the trees that are right around you. You walk outside your door, what's that tree? That's what I wanted. Excuse me. That's what I was trying to answer. The other thing is I wanted to design this book for everybody. I found with a lot of the tree guides that I've had, it's really difficult to get into tree identification. Certainly, if you haven't taken, say, a tree ID course or something like that. If you go through a community college or a larger 4-year university, or you take an extension class, Master Gardener, or something like that, then they teach you the kind of basics of tree identification. But if you have never done that, let's say you are a programmer that has a big knack for going outside and taking good walks, because everyone has that somewhere inside of them, then you don't really have a good opportunity other than self-study to go out and find courses and look at things online and hope that you are A, absorbing the correct information, but B, applying it correctly, and C, getting actual accurate information to begin with. There's so much misinformation out on the internet that is correct under certain circumstances, but maybe not in every circumstance. And it's not quite clear when it is, because everyone wants to put out as much as possible. So the quality has really gone down. So what I wanted to do is kind of up that quality, design it for a particular place and a particular group of people living here, or anyone really who wants to move and learn about trees in the Pacific Northwest. But at the end of the day, that is kind of my guiding light. And that's kind of where we started. So the thing that also comes to kind of is all underneath this, I guess you could say, it's almost like my raison d'être, my reason for being is, I really think walking around and identifying trees is fun. It's a passion that I've always had since the very, very first time I ever got out and learned about this, which was at the University of Oregon doing a course called Trees Across Oregon. And what this course talked about was what the natural history of the entire state was, how to identify different trees, common trees that are non-native and native trees that are common and less common, and where they grow and why across the state of Oregon. And I just completely lost myself in this course. I absolutely fell in love with learning how to identify trees. It was like I learned the secret code that was just there for the taking. You didn't have to actually go pay for anything. You just had to learn what the code was, and then you could go out and apply it, and I could identify anything. At least that's how it felt. I learned quickly, when just learning maybe 25 or 30 trees in that one year, that one semester, that was not near what was actually out in the world. I ended up taking a couple more classes and learning a little bit more in depth about how we divide trees up, how we choose which ones are growing with which. And I just was absolutely flabbergasted with what we had just here in Portland, which is where I grew up, which is where I'm based right now. So I thought it was a lot of fun. And I love, these are all trees or pictures that I took this spring in preparation of this book. And doing this opened my eyes to all these different trees, and I paying attention very closely to when they grow and when the bud bursts happen, when this flower blooms, when that flower blooms. You think all the cherries bloom at the same time. No, 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 I learned. They're all quite different. And so I'm fascinated by it. So I always think it's really fun. However, I'm also an arborist. So also, tree identification is something that is very important, not necessarily because knowing the tree's ID for the sake of knowing the tree's ID is important, but knowing what that means and what kind of comes along with that. It's just like anything else that has a name. As soon as you know the name, it comes along with all these other traits and characteristics. So, for example, if I'm an arborist looking at a Sitka spruce versus a hemlock versus a Douglas fir, a Western hemlock, they all grow in relatively the same spots. You can find them in the same forests. You can find them growing in urban areas all the time. But if you can't identify the differences between them, you don't know which one is which, then you may be giving different advice for the wrong tree. So, for example, the Western hemlock looks very similar to the Douglas fir to the untrained eye. However, if you are looking at a disease, if you're looking at a tree as an arborist and someone says, hey, you got to come look at this tree, this is an issue with it, I got to know what to do, and you can't identify it correctly, you misidentify a hemlock as a Douglas fir, then you don't know to look for certain things. You don't know what the failure profile is of that tree. You don't know what diseases could be affecting it. You don't know if the tree is looking healthy. You see a tree that normally is yellow, but then it's green, that'll throw you off, or vice versa. And so this all comes down to the idea that tree identification is not just kind of this fun party trick that you can have if you are doing any amount of work with and around trees, say an arborist, a landscaper, master gardener. You are in any way working with trees or plants, kind of broadly speaking. If you can't identify them, then you are not starting on the right foot. Then you don't know where to go next. It's the most fundamental thing when it comes to arboriculture. And I usually liken this to something like a car mechanic, where if the car mechanic doesn't know what the vehicle is that they're working on, then they have no reasonable idea about what needs to be done. Everything's very similar. They all have four wheels, they all have an engine and a carburetor, they all have a transmission, all these different things. But they're all slightly different. They all require different parts. They're different brands that have slight different ways that things are put together. One has a metric unit, the other has an imperial unit. All these little teeny tiny things that really will affect what you do, and you can't have a one size fit all. It's the same exact thing for trees. And one of my old colleagues, his name is John Paul. He's over at the University of South Dakota. He likens this to a veterinarian, where if you go to a veterinarian, you bring in whatever animal you have. Let's say it's a dog, and they misidentify it as a guinea pig, or they misidentify your rabbit as a beaver, or anything like that. You would be flabbergasted about why you're going to this veterinarian who can't even identify the animal they're about to give you advice on that you're paying many hundreds of dollars for. It's the same exact thing for tree care. And whenever you are an arborist working around trees, that's the first thing that you should be getting down pat, which is tree identification. Now, these are, my personal fun things, and I think other people really enjoy going out and identifying trees. And I know arborists should enjoy it, but they also have to do it for work. So sometimes when you do something for fun, it doesn't necessarily be the thing you want to do for work. But this is all kind of the technical side that are very useful for recreation or very useful for your job. But tree identification goes quite a bit further than that, but it's in a bit of a less tangible way. So trees are so learning to identify your trees is a way for you to connect with the trees around you. And when you're connecting with the trees around you, you're also connecting with the landscape that's around you. So it is more of a means of pulling together you and the spaces around you, both the living things and the non-living things, and figuring out a way to navigate your space. And I know this sounds a little bit kind of uh, really idealistic, where you learn your trees and everyone knows how to navigate their space and things. But it goes a little bit further than that, and it's not just quite my fun theory. And I want to kind of dive into that a little bit and talk about why understanding your neighborhood trees is a little bit more important. And I will tell you all these trees as I go through, because these are a bunch of fun trees that I've had that I've encountered in my life. This is a southern catalpa, Catalpa bignonioides, by a lovely restaurant in Portland, if you're in town, called Epif. And it's on Northeast Flanders and 28th Avenue, and it had a huge failure a couple of years ago, and they almost took it out. But then a bunch of people rallied. The property owners didn't want to remove it, and so they've kept the tree, and it is a really giant tree. I think it's about 3 or so feet in diameter, and it is a staple of this environment. And if you look closely in the very middle of the screen, just to the right of the sign that says Flanders, you'll notice the building has actually been cut out and built up and around this tree, the one limb that comes out. They said, no, 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 we can make this work. We don't want to even cut this tree off. So this is someone who really cares about this tree. It's a beautiful tree in a beautiful spot. So learning to identify your trees, knowing their name, that is the first step in getting knowledge about that tree. I spoke a little bit about that when I was talking about how arborists interact with trees, knowing the species characteristics, the failure profiles of a tree. But it also goes a little bit further into knowing something about the land of a native tree, where it's growing, why it's growing, how it's growing, and what it says about this tree. So this is a white bark pine, Pinus albicaulis. This is a native tree to Oregon. You can find them growing up on Mount Hood at the very highest elevations in the Cascades, but mostly you'll see them very far in the northeast in the Wallowa Mountains. And then they're very common as you go further south through the Cascades, the Sierra Nevada, and in the kind of Great Basin and some in the Rocky Mountains. So white bark pine, this one in Warner Mountains, California, is growing up at probably about 4,000 or 5,000 feet in this particular location. And when you're climbing up these slopes, this is a wilderness, the Warner Mountain Wilderness. As you're climbing up these mountains, you start to notice, if you know the differences in the trees, the gradients that change around you. I have a water bottle somewhere around here. There it is. So what you'll notice is as you go from the lower elevations, which are much drier in this area, it goes from Jeffrey pine and ponderosa pine in this area. Actually, there's Washoe pine, which is either, depending on how you look at it, a variety or a species of ponderosa pine. So as you go further up, you start to see changes where you get a little bit different elevational changes. There's different water regimes. There's different soils that start to develop or have developed. There's different amounts of snow level or snow pack that stays in a certain area. And you start to see the trees change. And when you see that change in the gradient during this hike, when the vegetation starts to change, you start to learn a little bit more. You don't even need to look at your maps. You don't need to know anything other. Your legs will probably tell you, but you don't need to know the elevation of where you're at, because you can just look at the trees and say, I now see that the white bark pine is growing. That must mean I'm about 4,000 or 5,000 feet up in this mountain. You also get to learn what the soils are like and what other kind of critters are around. You'll notice that this white bark pine has maybe 4 or 5 stems, maybe up to 6, growing right in one little spot. That's very quintessential of these trees, this species, because the cones are very tightly packed together. The scales stay really tight, and they're pried apart by Clark's nutcracker, which is a species of bird that has developed a very long symbiotic relationship with this tree. It spreads the seeds and it scatter hoards them in these little caches. If the birds die or don't come back for whatever reason, then those seeds will germinate. But because they pack so many seeds into one little stash, they end up growing multiple stems. So these could be 3 or 5 different individual species or individuals that have grown up all right next to each other. So they create these fun little groves of trees that look like one big old tree. So just by knowing the species, I can tell you the elevation. I can tell you what is going on in the soil. I can tell you that there is another species of bird that's very active in this area. And I can also tell you that as you go higher up, you're going to find less trees, probably no trees. This is the highest one generally in our mountains. So learning the names of the trees, learning how to identify them will tell you a lot about the tree itself, the partners that it has, as well as the soil and the climatic conditions that grow around it. It also can give you a certain amount of appreciation. And I think this is something that is really close to my heart, because I like to go out into the wild spaces of our state and of the whole West to begin with, or rather in a larger sense. And I like to look at different trees and see what's going on there. Hike really far out to find one species growing in one particular spot, because that's the only place that it grows for whatever reason. But I also enjoy doing this in the city, where in places like Portland, in Seattle, Eugene, Salem, Bend, wherever there's more people, where they've been there a little bit longer, you tend to find really interesting tree species. We take trees with us all the time. We have for millennia. As long as we've been species who figured out how to plant a seed, we've taken things with us. So on the left side, there's a curl leaf mountain mahogany, Cercocarpus ledifolius, and it's a beautiful small tree in the rose family that grows out at the highest kind of scrubby elevations in the east and the south of the state. And it grows way further south, down through California and the Great Basin to the Rocky Mountains, at all these kind of same exact spots. But they're not really a common species in Oregon. I would say they're marginal at best. But in this one specific grove where this tree is up on Spanish Peak, which is in the Ochocos in eastern Oregon, central Oregon, they have this little grove on the side of the hill where nothing else apparently can thrive. This is the only tree, and it's got a maybe a square mile or so worth of space. And so as you're walking through otherwise pine forests, you pop out and there's just this flat expanse with these perfectly spaced trees that are all the same curl leaf mahogany. And I could not stay there long enough. My friend had to pull me away while we were on our hike because it was just this beautiful space, and it made me appreciate the uniqueness of this individual location. Now, on the right is Abies concolor. That's the white fir. If I was back in the Ochocos, that species or hybrid between it and the grand fir are a dime a dozen. They are not interesting trees out there. Maybe if you see a really big one, they're kind of cool, but they're not unique by any stretch of the imagination. However, in Portland, Oregon, right here in Northeast Portland, that is probably the biggest tree of that species in the entire west side of well, I shouldn't say that. There's probably larger ones, but at least in Portland, this is by far one of the biggest species or one of the biggest examples of this species. And I was working for the city and got to tell the homeowners who were going to split this lot. You can see that blue house in the back. That's on a double lot there. They were going to partition off this corner, turn it into a few new houses. It's all good and well in the sense that people are needing a place to live. In Portland here, we have a housing crisis, but that pits it against the idea of conserving space for trees and especially conserving the space and the large trees themselves. So this is probably one of the biggest individuals of the species in the entire city. And I got to tell them that. And I got to say, this is a really unique and special tree. You're not going to find many of them around that look like this anywhere in this region. You're going to have to go far to the east to their native habitat or to the south. And then you might find some that are that big, but the odds are still against it. This is a really good condition. And it's a really good tree. I thought they were going to cut it down. Usually when development starts, it doesn't stop, but for whatever reason, I am not privy to, they decided not to go through with development. And now that tree is still there to this day. I literally saw it earlier. So this is a situation where there's two different kinds of appreciation going on just by identifying this tree. If that's a Douglas fir on the right on that corner of Mallory and Going Street, maybe it's a nice tree. It's not even a big Douglas fir, but it's a really big, extraordinary white fir. The curl leaf mahogany, if it's just another rhododendron growing around, who cares? It's a dime a dozen. You don't have as much appreciation for it. But if you can notice that it's a particularly special individual, then you have a little bit more. You have a little bit more appreciation for it. Now, the last bit, which was confirmed to me on my suspicions that I had a couple, I've had it for a couple years, but someone this last couple weeks ago, I was at a conference in Kentucky, and they brought this up without me even saying it. But knowing the trees and the species around you brings you a certain level of comfort. And when I say comfort, I don't mean in the sense that you are uncomfortable around other trees. It's more of a sense of knowing and recognizing what's around you. So if you are from Eastern Oregon, this is going to be, or Central Oregon, this is going to be a very common thing that you see, which is a long, expansive Western juniper just growing off into the distance. Now, I know there's a lot of controversy. We just did a recent podcast about the Western juniper. It is expanding its range because of lack of fire. So people are now kind of thinking, oh, I don't like this tree, but it's a native tree and it grows really well in this area. And it's just doing what it does whenever there has been a lack of fire. It's done this its entire existence. So this is a tree that you'd recognize very much. As soon as you go to a different part of the state, even, or a different part of the country, and you see different trees growing in different ways, your brain, even subconsciously, can recognize that all the textures and all the little things that you're used to are different. You can go to a different city in the United States, designed exactly the same way as whatever city you're in right now, and it will feel just a little bit different. The people are the same, the roads are the same, the cars are the same, the markets, everything is exactly the same. We're a very homogenized country in a lot of ways, but the trees are not the same. And you'll feel a little bit different. You'll know you're in a new space. And that has a lot to do with your unconscious mind knowing and recognizing and being very familiar with all of the patterns of all the trees around you. If you can start to identify those things, then you sharpen all of that and you put it instead of the subconscious mind to the front of your mind. And you start to realize, oh, I get this space. It's what my body and my mind knows is safe, is comfortable, is what I know. And when you go somewhere else, it's not that you're unsafe or you're uncomfortable. You are just not quite as attuned to all these small little things. And this is a really important thing that he brought up because he said, yeah, I feel this all the time whenever I go away. And so I do think that tree identification is something that actually is subconsciously kind of affecting how I feel about spaces. And I was like, thank you so much for saying that. I've thought this for many years, and I'm really happy to hear that I got to hear it without actually bringing it up to you. Now, this goes even a little bit further where when we're talking about tree identification, it doesn't just connect you to the trees around you in a sense of kind of appreciating them and knowing they're around and kind of giving them a thumbs up and say, yeah, I recognize you. Everything feels really good. It helps to combat even intense ideas that start to have larger real life ramifications in terms of how trees are maintained or planted or removed in urban areas or out in wild forest areas. So plant awareness disparity is the more modern name for what we used to call plant blindness. And essentially, what it means is that people are more attuned to people and human made things and animals than they are to plants. Plants essentially disappear in the eaves. They disappear as a background to whatever it is you're actually looking at or paying attention to. They're just those nice things that are around. You take them literally for granted. They're always going to be there. You don't look and think and wonder what those species are. You don't recognize them. They're just this green wall that kind of is all around you. This is called plant awareness disparity. You don't even see the trees. You don't even necessarily know they're there. You might, but you might just assume they're there, but you don't actually really see them. You don't notice them. And this has ramifications because it doesn't make anyone care about trees. If you don't see it, if it's just another face in the crowd that you don't recognize, then you don't have any real intense kind of pull towards it. It doesn't have any stake. You don't have any stake in it. So this ends up actually having real life consequences when it comes to things like conservation. If you don't know what a forest looks like, if you only see green on either side of you, you can't tell if that is a healthy forest or an unhealthy forest, if that is a real forest or a plantation forest. You can't tell if that is an invasive species that's filling up this neighboring lot or if it's a beautiful new kind of woodland that's just growing up. It's all native species. And these come with different kind of consequences. You also don't really care at the end of the day. If it's all just green one way and another, then what's the difference if it's green from an invasive species, green from a plantation tree, or green from a tree that is actually providing far greater benefit because it's a native species grown in a native way, creating all the complexity that old growth forests have. And once you start to pay attention to these things, you can start caring about them a little bit more, and you have a bit more stake in the game. You're like, oh, wait, hold on. I can start to see the difference between the quality of these two things that I used to think are just these green walls. And that then is followed up by action. If you actually can recognize the trees and the species and the things that are around you, you are more likely to take action to protect them. If you can look at this row of dawn redwoods, which is growing in Delta Park, it's a protected park, but you still can't necessarily trust it. They have to develop parks. You'll notice there's soccer fields and there's baseball fields all around these trees. So it could have been that at some point, some designer in the parks, in the parks of the city of Portland, could have said, well, let's just cut these down. Let's build this new parking area here because that'd be really good for our baseball fields. And then we can just replant this row of trees. But if you can recognize that these are not just any common tree, these are dawn redwoods. These are the state fossil of Oregon because they were growing here 50 million years ago, and now are the fossils we find all throughout the John Day fossil beds. Now they're this species that we thought was extinct until 1945 when Chinese scientists and foresters ended up finding them and saying, wow, these look just like those fossils we found in Japan not like 2 years ago. This is crazy. Then we plant them over here. We know that these trees cannot be any older than 1945 because we didn't know to plant them before that. We didn't even know that they existed. Us, we being Western science, the people in the area that called them water furs, they've known they're there for, as long as they've been there. So you start getting this kind of cascade effect where if you can identify a tree, if you can give something a name, then you start to recognize it, you start to care for it. This is in our culture all the time right now. The idea of saying someone's name gives them this kind of realness. It gives them an actual humanity. So if you can start naming trees, then you're actually giving them a certain amount of humanity. You're not necessarily giving them a anthropomorphized vision of, whatever it is, but you're actually giving them something that you are connecting them to, something that's real. And that ends up having more real life actions. If everyone knew all the trees around them, they would probably care a lot more about them, and specifically the really special ones. And if everyone thinks every tree is special, then honestly, it raises all boats, I guess. I can't really complain. So this is kind of the real life things that I think in the learning the species and the names of trees ends up being. So I can hear as soon as I bring this up to everyone, they always say, okay, great. Yeah, the tree identification is wonderful. I totally agree with you. But why? Why do we need another tree guide to tell us these things? We have like a million guides that are out here already teaching us everything there is to know about trees. There's not really anything new that you're gonna be able to teach us. Do we need another one? And my answer is yes. My answer is yes, because when I show you this picture and I tell you where it is, it's way out in the Wallowa Mountains in the Eagle Cap Wilderness, hiking up, I think, on the west side of the Wallowa River. I think it's Wallowa River. Anyway, as you go up, you find this big beautiful lake. It's the first lake as you just start getting into the lake's basin area, and you'll be able to bring your local tree ID guide, and you'll be able to identify these trees. You'll see that there is a Engelmann spruce and there is a lodgepole pine. That is a wonderful use of a very helpful tree ID guide, of which we have very many. They cover all of our native trees. They cover all the trees and anything that grows in our native forest. In fact, if I can particularly say, Trees to Know in Oregon and Washington is one of my top favorite books. I use that especially the newer version that came out, I think in 2020, all the time. And the other one on the far left there, Conifers of the Pacific Slope, that is by Michael Kaufman. And he is a just brilliant author, talks all about specifically conifers from up in Alaska all the way down through Baja California. He covers everything that grows in what would essentially be the mountains of the western side of the continent that go right down into the Pacific Ocean, the Pacific Slope. And he is a fan of conifers to the point where he'll tell you not only how to get to these trees, he'll tell you how to identify them, which variety you'll find where, and has different hikes. He actually developed a hike down in Northern California that goes through some 50 different species. I think it's about a 300-mile large loop. And I think he called the Bigfoot Trail. And I have yet to do it, but it's on my list to do here very soon. And these are all great trees. And Shrubs of the Pacific Northwest is a fantastic guide. It's very thorough. It's incredibly thorough. It does everything that you could even consider a shrub. And that's a lot of things, even things that they call subshrubs, which are just woody things that don't grow bigger than, an herb. So that is a spectacular guide. On the very far upper right there is the Sibley Guide to Trees, another wonderful guide for all the native trees of North America with a little bit of new or of common ornamental trees planted in there. But the issue with these books is that most people don't live in the wild forests of wherever they live. The Sibley Guide to Trees is spectacular. But if you go to downtown Portland and you look up any of you that were out there that said that your favorite tree is an oak, you run across an oak. It's on, let's say, Multnomah Street and 26th Avenue. You open up your Sibley Guide to Trees. You flip over to where it says oaks because you can see that it's an oak tree. Then you'll look at it and say, hey, okay, well, which one is this? You have no idea necessarily which tree it's likely to be because there's a lot of oak trees that look exactly like a lot of other oak trees. But the Sibley Guide does not tell you where it should be planted, where it could be planted. It just tells you what is the native tree and shows you where it's native to. We have a lot of trees from the eastern United States that we plant over in the West. We have a lot of trees, at least a few in the West, that we do not plant in our cities, yet they are native to our region. So Trees to Know in Oregon and Washington, they also have a couple horticulture species, but if you are convinced that you have a true fir, you flip through and you say, well, this actually kind of looks like a Pacific silver fir, and you are in the middle of Eugene, you're very unlikely to have got your tree ID correct because That is not a species that is very commonly planted along the streets or in the parks of the lower Willamette Valley. It's a very rare tree in that lower elevation, but it's native almost everywhere to the east when you go up to the Cascades. So it's very common, but not where everyone lives. And the same thing goes for both of these other trees or both these other tree books. And that is an issue that I thought, okay, there's something missing here. So then you say, well, there are other good guidebooks. We have the Tree Book, which is one that came out, I think, in 2019 by the famous Michael Durr and Keith Warren. Michael Durr, of course, did the Manual of Woody Landscape Plants. If any of you have ever done any work on how to identify different trees, that book either is or should be in your repertoire. But they followed it up with the Tree Book, which is also done by Keith Warren, who's at least historically, was the head grower and tree propagator for Frank Schmidt's nursery, the biggest nursery in the entire country, which is based out of Boring, Oregon. So they together put this book together that says, here's all the different trees and all the different varieties and cultivars that are generally planted in the landscape across across the nation, across mostly North America, north of Mexico. Because then once you get south of Mexico, the diversity just gets insane. And so they had to cut it off somewhere. It's even challenging to go into a lot of places in South Texas, even. So the Tree Book is really useful, but it doesn't tell you what is actually planted over in Oregon. It doesn't tell you what's planted in this location. It just says this is generally a tree that is planted sometimes in the landscape. So it's very good and helpful, but you have to know a thing or two about trees before you open those books, because if you don't, then you have no idea which ones are common in your region versus completely uncommon. They have several different trees in both the Tree Book and in the Woody manual, or the Manual of Woody Landscape Plants, that are so obscure and so uncommon out here in the West, but are a dime a dozen if you go to the East. The Quercus alba, which is the white oak, that is a very common tree. It's in every backyard if you go to North Carolina, if you're anywhere in the East. It's extraordinarily rare out here, but it's also the tree that's on the very front of the Sibley Guide to Trees. And then this bottom one, the Smithsonian Nature Guide, is one that it's been gifted to me a lot, these kinds of books, and you can find them very much in sort of generic stores that just want to give you something about trees. But they are so broad that you can learn a thing or two, but you don't have any idea what the actual tree is that you're really working from. And you don't know, is any of these trees, are they actually planted here? Do they actually grow here? Or are they just a random smattering of trees that they have from Europe and from Asia and from North America? I have yet to know I can't figure out the pattern as to how they decide which tree book is where. But these are nationally applicable books. They have nothing to do with something down here, right where we live, which is the Pacific Northwest. So what I wanted to do is write this book that is focused on my kind of version of how to identify trees, which is heavily focused here in the Pacific Northwest. Now, for better or worse, any tree that you have growing in Portland is probably going to also be growing elsewhere in the United States, most specifically up in Seattle. If you have anything that's growing in Bend, it's probably going to be the same kind of tree growing out in Northeast Oregon or Southwest Oregon. Or not Southwest, Southeast Oregon, Northeast Oregon. It'll also probably be easy to find those in Boise, in Missoula, in Spokane, in Hanford. Any of these big cities and these small cities, anywhere in our region, they tend to have the same trees growing there. Like I said, it's good for us. We can always go to identify our trees. We feel very comfortable here. However, not necessarily the best trees all the time, because as you may know, the west side and the east side are climatically very different. So the fact that they are always planted in the same spot is a little bit of a trouble, or a little bit of a problem. But what I wanted to do is help anyone learn how to identify the trees that are in their neighborhood. You walk outside. This is over in the Overlook neighborhood in Northeast Portland, North Portland. As soon as you walk outside, I want you to be able to open this book up and learn how to identify trees. I want you to know what you're looking at and what you're looking for, because once you can nail down those two things, you're able to do just about anything with Tree ID. If you can learn to read and interpret the technical kind of code that people write things in for botanical literature, then yeah, you're doing great. And that's something, especially the Woody manual, or the Manual of Woody Landscape Plants, is really challenging to work with. It's one reason why, because all of the terms are very technical. So you got to know what they're talking about. You have to be able to translate that. I want to take that away and I want to give all the tricks right out of the gate so that anyone can go out and start looking at trees and identify them. And the way that I decided to do this is to actually show what trees are planted and growing around you. This is a foxtail pine, Pinus balfouriana. If you read a couple native tree books, it will tell you here is this tree. It'll show you where it's native to Northern California and one little grove also in Southern California. And you might think you found this tree somewhere growing near your house. You did not. I don't think I've seen this tree planted a single time outside of its native habitat. I don't even know if it's planted, period. I know it grows all over these places in this very particular kind of rock and these very particular kinds of elevations in these particular places. But if you didn't know that, you might think, oh, this kind of looks like it's a foxtail pine. I bet you I got a foxtail pine. First thing I've done is curated the list of trees to exclude any trees that are not going to be those you're going to find elsewhere. And then I decided to show them off in terms of what the diversity is because we have more trees growing in our urban areas by a margin of probably about 4-1 than we do our native habitats. Again, that is a factor of people bringing trees from wherever they are and planting them. And again, that goes back to comfortability. The best thing that you can do to make yourself feel at home in a new spot, bring a tree or a couple plants that you recognize it can make you feel really good. So the other thing is I wanted to tap into people's innate skills. Everyone can do this. Anyone can identify a tree, anyone can identify a plant. You just have to know, again, what you're looking for and what you're looking at. And I wanted to bring this idea that I came up with years ago called the stepwise journey. Now, this is just a way for people to really kind of conceptualize how to go about identifying a tree rather than just staring at a tree and thinking, okay, there's that tree. I would rather be able to structure how you're looking at a tree so that you can eliminate options as you go. So here are 3 different species of conifers. And as soon as you look at these, you can think, okay, I see that they are different, but I'm not sure exactly how. But if you start to look at them in a very stepwise fashion, you'll be able to make that assumption. But first, I have to make a quick adjustment. There we go. All right. That tree hangs pendulously. So now it's oriented in the proper way as opposed to the other 2 trees. In the far left, it's a deodar cedar. Middle, it's a noble fir. The far right, western white pine. So each one of these trees is in the pine family. They look very similar to the non-trained eye if you're looking at the whole rest of the tree. You would call them a pine tree or a fir tree. But the deodar cedar on the left, it has a short cone that's kind of barrel-shaped and it stays growing upright on the branches, and it has very tightly pressed scales that will fall apart piece by piece, scale by scale when the cone dries, when the seeds are mature. The noble fir does the same thing, but it gets 2 or 3 times as big, and it has those really intense bracts that are coming out of it. And that is the only species of fir that has that kind of bract that comes out, that at least grows in our region, natively or non-natively. And on the other side is a pine that hangs down. So we can start eliminating these different things if we're trying to figure it out. We look at any of these, the middle cone, we can say, okay, I know it has an upright growing cone. So I'm going to eliminate pines out of my ID. Then I have this one on the left, or it may look kind of like this deodar cedar on the left side here, but no, it doesn't have any bracts. And I know that the only upright growing cone that falls apart piece by piece that has bracts is the noble fir. You don't need to look at anything else, but if you wanted, you could also look at the foliage and you could say, this is singly attached needles. And the bottom left, the deodar cedar, has needles that are attached in bunches and they come out like little fireworks of 20 or 45 at a time. So without even looking at the foliage, you can start to eliminate other trees just by the characteristics of the cone. So this is a little bit of a quick version of kind of what the stepwise journey would look like. But the idea is that if you open up a tree book, you should be able to walk outside, look at a tree, flip through until you see something that looks like it, and then learn how to identify that tree and learn what it is you need to look for to tell you this is that tree and here's how you eliminate all these other options as you go. Now, another thing that is very helpful when you're trying to eliminate options is looking at a trick that every botanist, every tree person, anyone who really looks at plants is very quickly and imminently aware of. And that is the arrangement of either the buds or the leaves. So leaves are the organs that grow just below the bud. You can see on the left, there's a shagbark hickory. And the very bottom of that twig, you can see that there's a weird kind of lip or U-ish, V-ish shaped scar. That is the leaf scar where a leaf used to be. A leaf starts at the twig right where the bud is. Everything that comes out of that after that is officially the leaf. So the buds and the leaves all grow at the same orientation. So you can say, well, is this an oppositely arranged or alternately arranged plant? The one on the left is alternate because the buds alternate on either side of the twigs. There's one node, which is where one of these buds or the leaves come out. There's one individual bud. On the right side, though, the European horse chestnut, it's opposite. So there's two individual buds that come out from a single node, from a single point along that twig. And that is the easiest way to start telling different species of broadleaf trees apart, saying, hey, let's just look right now. Don't look at anything else. First, look to see if it is opposite or alternate. Once you see those two differences, then you can eliminate entire swaths of trees and say, if it's alternate, it's not a maple, it's not a dogwood, it's not a horse chestnut. And if it is opposite, you can say it's not a hickory, it's not any of these other trees that have alternately arranged leaves. Then you can actually look at the characteristics of the leaves themselves. The one on the left is the same tree. The one on the right is the same tree, European horse chestnut on the right, shagbark hickory on the left. And they have different ways these leaves are oriented. They're both compound, but the shagbark hickory has what's called a pinnately compound leaf, where it has a long stem, a long petiole that has leaves coming off on either side of it. Pinnate means feather-like. And then on the right is a palmate leaf of the horse chestnut, palm like the palm of your hand. So if you look at where those leaves come together, they all come back to one central location. So there's 7 leaflets that start from a central spot and then go outwards. The shagbark on the left, in contrast, does not have them all starting from one spot. It has 5 leaflets that are pinnately compound as they go along down the stem. Then you can look at the fruit and you can say, wow, one on the left has these funny little these 4 little suture lines, and it's very smooth and green. The one on the right is very poking. It has this gigantic nut in the middle. That nut is actually the seed. Botanically, let's not even get into it, but you can see there's a lot of differences. So the stepwise journey would say, well, what arrangement is the leaf? Great. Now, is this a simple leaf or is it a compound leaf? If it is one of those, then you keep on going down your journey and eliminating all the trees that don't have the characteristics you're looking at until at the end of maybe 2, 3, I would say at most 4 different characteristics, you're probably pretty dang close to identifying the tree that you're looking at. It's just a matter of knowing what you're looking at and knowing how to apply what you're looking for into whatever you're trying to identify. So I wanted to close here and give a little bit of what this would look like if you're doing something that's in the pine family. So these are all of the common species that we have in our region that are in the pine family and all of their little characteristics. And I tried to put them together so that you could kind of see the ones that were similar, but then what separates them apart. So let's kind of go through this. All of these species, except for all of them are native here in some way except the cedars. The cedars are not native to our area, but you'll find them planted all over our cities and towns. So on the very middle, the green one in the very top middle, that's the firs, the true firs. They have single needles and upright growing cones. So if we see a cone that's upright, that could be either the true cedars the true firs, or it could be the true cedars. But you can immediately tell the difference in the leaves where the firs have those single leaves that are attached just one at a time. And the true cedars have leaves that are attached in those bunches at the end of those twigs. So right then we can say, great, I can look at these 2 cones that are kind of similar and I can start pairing them off because of these other characteristics. Then if we look down through the middle, you can see that there's the true firs that look a lot like the true spruces, Picea. But the cones hang pendulously down and the needles are far sharper and they are on these little teeny tiny pegs. So if you just have a list that continually says, here's the differences between each, and you compare them like something that we have here, you can tell pretty quickly what the differences are. And you can say, aha, I can see that this cone looks like this, therefore it is not any of these other species. If you go to the right, the larches, they have these little tiny upright cones, but they don't break apart. They have leaves that look a lot like the true cedars, but the larches are deciduous. So they're very soft. They're very feathery leaves, needles that don't have any wax on them. You can kind of rub your fingers down them and they feel very, very soft to the touch. The Douglas fir at the very bottom in the middle has bracts that come out on pendulous cones. It's the only pendulous coned tree that has those kinds of bracts on the cones. On the far right is the hemlock with this teeny, teeny, tiny little cone. You can see my hand there. It's not even is the same width of two of my fingers. It's a very small cone, smaller than all the other trees for sure. And it also hangs pendulously. On the far left, those are the pines. The pines are easily split because of their needles that are in bunches of not many like the larches and the cedars, but of only 2, 3, and 5. So as soon as you see these different characteristics, you can quickly start to parse these things out. And if you look at that second characteristic, the cone, then you got you've gone way further without even trying. You look at two things, and most of these trees, except the larches, are deciduous, and that's a clue in and of itself. And you can start parsing all these different trees around. So this is the kind of thing that I want to do in this book, and this is what I want to bring to people. I want to bring tree identification and the power that it has to everybody, because it's a very, very human thing to be able to go outside and look at plants. There are more green colors that humans can recognize than any other colors on the spectrum. So this is something that we've been able to do since we have become, since we've been a species, since probably before we've been a species. So it's an innate thing. And I just want to bring it back to the forefront. And I want to make it accessible to everybody in the entire Pacific Northwest for our trees, and so that everyone can go out and make those connections with trees. So this is my favorite photo. This is my partner and some of my friends. They're out there hugging a tree, and it's just quintessential. You can identify these big, amazing trees, and you can realize just how special they are as soon as you learn their name. So hopefully that'll come out in the next year, and that'll be helpful if anyone who's trying to learn how to identify trees, wants to identify trees, or is just curious to have another cool tree ID book on the shelves. But that is all I have. So thank you very much. If you're curious about the book, we don't have a 100% name yet, but it'll be coming out in August 2025, and you'll hear about it, especially if you listen to our podcast, Completely Arbortrary, and you can get a little bit more information about trees of whatever sort you'd like there. Or you can just follow along with me. Clapp 4 Trees is my name on the internet, and you can find me wherever you're on the internet. And that's where I'm at. So I'll leave it there and pass it back to Chandra.
Wow, thank you so much, Casey. That was all very exciting.
Thank you.
I didn't want to interrupt, even though we were going to go a little over, but
yeah, I was trying to stop quick.
It's okay. So yeah, if folks need to go, that's totally fine, but we're gonna go on a little bit longer before the Q&A and do a few questions, and folks can always catch the recording tomorrow. So let me share. I'm seriously, I just want to like show you pictures of cool trees that I've seen.
That sounds great.
Talk about some of the amazing experience, trees I've experienced in cool places. So I mean, I totally get what you're talking about there, and I love the stepwise journey. That's going to be great as far as accessibility goes, and yeah, I love it all.
Perfect. Thank you.
And so much of what you talked about resonates with me, and working at Oregon Wilds, like combating plant awareness disparity, so that people care and take action. It's one of the reasons we lead hikes, and why I wrote a book about hiking in ancient forests, so that people could really learn to appreciate the areas they're recreating in. So anyway, it's just great. But we'll come back to Q&A in a moment. If anyone's sticking around and wants to enter a question in the Q&A bubble, please do. We have a couple to get to if no one has any more. But I'm just going to take a very quick few minutes to touch briefly on some of Oregon Wild's most pressing forest and tree related work. So diverse forests, outside of our cities, once covered half the state. And after, decades of logging and other exploitation of our forests, these landscapes have changed pretty dramatically. With less than 20% of our naturally occurring forests remaining, and most of those converted into uniform tree plantations for timber or otherwise changed from fire exclusion or livestock grazing. We really need to conserve the biodiversity of plants, animals, fungi, and tree species in Oregon in these remaining forests. That'll help our forest ecosystem store more carbon, be more resilient to climate change and other disturbances, and just, be valuable in their own right. So Oregon Wild's work over many years has focused a lot on whole forests and ecosystems, like habitat for old growth dependent species in Western Oregon, like spotted owls, and on protecting the largest trees and restoring dry forest ecosystems in Eastern Oregon, as well as working to have common sense conservation plans for our state forests. But we've also gone to bat for individual tree species, like Pacific yew. And Casey, I'm not sure that have you done a podcast about Pacific yew?
No, not about Pacific yew specifically, but I do believe it's on our agenda. We got a lot of trees on the agenda, so
Yeah,
I can't
right.
necessarily
Yeah.
say that when it
Well, I
will
think it's
happen,
a
but it surely will.
fantastic tree. So, Pacific yews are often found in the understory and shady areas in our wet west side forests. And they were being destroyed along with the ancient forest that they live in at a time when modern medicine was discovering really important uses for this tree. Taxol is a common cancer drug that was discovered, in the bark of Pacific yew trees. And our staff fought for better policies to protect this species in the 1980s and 90s at a really critical time. Another example of fighting for specific trees is just today, we sent out an email alert that is about juniper. So Casey talked a bit about Western juniper and the podcast that they did on it and back in February. And junipers provide vital habitat for wildlife, and they act as carbon sinks in the dry environments that they inhabit across much of Oregon and the wider West. But they're often maligned because they've been expanding their range, and that's largely due to human-caused practices like keeping fire out of the landscape. But that can cause some challenges for other conservation efforts, so it's really complicated. As part of President Biden's as the Biden administration's effort to protect mature and old growth forests, the BLM and Forest Service are considering better management options for juniper. And so our action alert that went out today helps you submit a comment during the comment period that's open right now, urging federal agencies to prioritize the conservation of old juniper and acknowledge the value of these vital trees. So you can look for that in your inbox if you are on our email list. And then on the forest ecosystem front, there will be updates coming soon in the next month or so on our efforts to better protect mature and old growth trees and forests through the National Old Growth Forest Plan Amendment, as well as a proposed amendment to the Northwest Forest Plan. And if you want a refresher, you can check out the webcast that we did in January about both of those plans. It's on our website. And if you want to start getting up to speed on the Northwest Forest Plan process, you can join a webinar next Tuesday at noon put on by the Pacific Northwest Forest Climate Alliance. And there's a QR code here for registration. And then finally, another alert that we sent out about forests this week on Monday is about weighing in on forest management in the Blue Mountains. So a bunch of the forests that are east of the Cascades are undergoing a plan revision. And it's an important time to weigh in on how we can better protect our forests out there. So that's a lot of the up-to-date tree action that Oregon Wild's working on. And I imagine we can get to some questions now. And I put the link to your podcast there too, Casey, and we'll send out some of these links when the email goes out tomorrow with the recording.
Perfect. And I should also note that for the raffle, we also are going to give away a bunch of stickers. We have a Cone of the Month Club sticker club, and so we have lots of cool stickers. So that's the Sugar Pine. This is Deodar Cedar, Golden Cone. We have the Eastern yew, as well as a bunch of other really cool trees that people have made with stickers. So it's also going to be a bunch of cool sticker swag coming with it. So if that is more reason to join or sign up with the raffle, I encourage you to.
That's great. Thank you so much. All right. Well, there are quite a few questions. I'll try to get to some that I think folks will be most interested in. One person asked about whether your guide, or maybe you can share any knowledge about or resources on what trees are most resilient to climate change. In cities, maybe it's going to be even more important to have trees that can withstand, bigger storms, longer droughts, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and honestly, it was a bit of something that I had to cut in a lot of ways for the book because mostly I'm trying to stay on target with a lot of trees. I have 340 trees that will be covered more or less, and so it was becoming just a little bit unwieldy to add in too much information. So at this point, it will only have some rudimentary information that may say something like, "Yeah, this tree's not going to be doing so well over the long term, and this one may be doing better or worse." But unfortunately, we still don't plant trees in a significant way that has to do with what is climate adapted. Maybe we will in the future, maybe that will ramp up. But what I wanted to do is create a guide that is really focused on the trees that are actually here, not trees that could be here, not trees that it would be nice if they were here, but the trees that are actually here. So any tree that grows in the kind of backyard areas of anywhere in the region, in the greater region, that's going to be covered. But I'm hoping that if everything is successful, that I could write a second book that would kind of be a follow-up saying the Western red cedar, for example, is a tree that's really getting hammered in lower elevations by climate change. So that's one that would be noted in the follow-up book would be something like, so you identified all your trees in the greater Pacific Northwest. Now let's talk about what their issues are, how to manage them, what if they good trees, are they bad trees, how should we adjust our planting and our management of those trees, and then also hopefully have some extras to say, hey, if this tree is not doing well or it's an invasive species, here are some other options that could be used in lieu of that tree. So some other planting ideas, but not in this book right off the bat.
Yeah, too much to cover.
Exactly.
But
Yeah.
I could see where that would be a helpful resource. Yeah. So we had a question about native cedars and cypress. And I think there was, when you had the slide with
Yes.
the various things, I wonder if you could differentiate those things.
Yeah, definitely. So that is one of the funny things. Actually, I only have about 8 trees left to cover in terms of me actually writing the profiles for them, and I just started the cedars, the true cedars, in the genus Cedrus. So that is a species that has been taxonomically and vernacularly separated and very much confused over the decades and centuries. So there is the botanical true cedars. There are 3 species. They are the deodar cedar, the Atlas cedar, and the the cedar of Lebanon. Those 3 species are the true cedars in the genus Cedrus. They're in the pine family. They have long cones that grow up like this and needle-like leaves. Then there are every other tree that we call a false cedar, which would be the western red cedar and the eastern red cedar, which is actually a juniper species. And so all the things that we call cedars that are native to our area are actually in the cypress family, and they are botanically not quite closely related to pines, which is the pine family, which is what the cedars are in. So at the end of the day, it comes down to a difference in vernacular terms versus botanical terms, and so I had a fun time kind of describing that. They are one of those generic trees, just like pines and firs, where everyone says, yeah, there's pine forest over there. It could be just about anything. So the common name and the scientific name are just a little bit different for different reasons.
Cool. Yes, like we call Douglas fir cones pine cones, even though they're
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And we call Douglas fir a fir when it's not a true fir either.
Right, right. Cool. And I loved, you were starting to get into the stepwise identification, and some of those characteristics are things that you could tell when there aren't leaves, which is awesome.
Yes,
So
for
someone
sure.
asked about identifying different trees in winter
Yeah.
by the shape of the branches in the tree. And I do find that the shape of trees can be really helpful, but it's also maybe harder to learn that way.
Yeah, it is. I mean, and when you first start, you might look at a tree and think they all look exactly the same. It takes many years of looking at the same tree over and over and over to get the differences in the shape. It'd be like recognizing one of your friends or your family members just by looking at their silhouette from the back of their head. It's a challenge. You can do it, but it's not necessarily something you'll be able to do the very first time. So the idea for Winter Tree ID is that I'll include anything that has that drops its needles or drops its leaves will have a picture of the individual bud and you will be able to look at the bud and the twig and compare the two and say, okay, is this the tree I think it is? Okay, I think it is. And it will also, in the description, I give you a general description. Here's the form, the leaves, the fruit, the flowers, things like that. And then I will say at the very bottom in my remarks, here's what you need to look for to identify this tree. Either in the wintertime, look for the bud that looks like this, or in the summertime, look for the leaves and the flowers like this. So I'll try to lay it out as blatantly as possible. So it won't be like, here's a profile that looks, so you can look at it and figure it out for yourself. I'm going to say, this is the thing that you need to look at. Here's the gotcha part of that tree.
Cool. Well, I can't wait. I think it's going to be really helpful for the common person who just likes to, you know,
Fingers
have
crossed. And I'm
those sort
sorry I
of
got a little bit of glare coming in. I'm trying to avoid
that's
it as
all
best
right.
I can.
It's a beautiful spring day. Well,
Yeah.
I think we should probably leave it there. And again, thank you so much. And we'll put your links in the email that we send out and on our blog post with this recording. And yeah, I can't wait to, maybe we should go exploring together sometime. I'm just gonna put
Hey,
that.
I would love that. That'd be great. You know way more about cool trails than I do so far, from what I can tell.
Cool. Well, I love the places that you included pictures from. So
Cool. Yeah, I've had a lot of fun. Try to go back and forth in the city and out of the city the whole time. So it
yeah.
wasn't too much in one spot.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you so much, Casey, for being here. Good night,
Yeah.
everyone. See you next time.
Bye, everyone. Thanks.